may I now invite Mr. Professor Jay Kesan, Professor of Law, H. Ross and Helen Workman Research Scholar Director, Program in Intellectual Property and Technology Law, University of Illinois College of Law. Over to you, Professor Kesan.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, great.
You are now the presenter. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, we're able to see your slides.
Okay, great. Once again, good morning, everyone. I will spend the next hour talking to you about patent valuation and give you an idea of the fundamental principles driving patent valuation, and also talk about practical considerations that go into deciding what exactly is the value associated with a patent. At any point in time, feel free to stop me or ask me questions and so on. Want to try and keep it interactive, but so don't hesitate at all. So patent valuation is by definition based on the context. And so one of the first questions you might ask is the value of a particular patent to whom? If you are a manufacturer and you are selling products based on the patented technology, then that patent may have a specific value for you. So let's think of an example. Imagine that you are making and selling refrigerators. And in some of your refrigerator models, you have a little device that dispenses crushed ice or cubed ice in front of your refrigerator. So a patent that covers that device, which simply dispenses crushed ice or cubed ice, the value of that patent to you might be how many extra refrigerators I'm able to sell in those models that have this ice dispensing device. In other words, you may have some refrigerator models where you don't have this, but you may have some other refrigerator models where you have this particular device. And you know that customers value that. In your particular case, in this particular example, the refrigerator itself is almost a commodity item. You know that there is not a great deal of patented technology in the compressors and so on and so forth. They've almost become commodities. But these little features like, dispensing cold water in front or dispensing crushed ice or cubed ice, these features, consumers really like that. So then in this simple example, let us say that you're selling $10 million worth of these refrigerators with this particular device that dispenses ice, then a patent on this device might be worth a certain small percentage of that sales in terms of a percentage of the revenue. And it might, based on historical data, etc. Let's say you decide that that percentage is 0.5%. Then in that case, essentially what you're saying is this device 0.5% of 10 million? That's 50,000. So essentially what you're saying is that this patent is worth about 50,000. And this year the sales are 10 million. We don't know what the sales are going to be in future years. And let's assume that there is 5 years left in the patent. And we can project out how the future performance in future years might be. Or we might simply say it's at least 10 million. And so, you might have a patent owner be willing to license this for a lump sum payment, roughly 50,000 for 5 years, $250,000. And so voila, there you go. At the very outset on this talk, I wanted to kind of give you an example just to kind of you see how a flavor for how these valuations are done. Now, the other issue here, of course, is what role are you playing in that particular market? Are you the person who is making the device that is crushing the ice or delivering ice cubes? Or are you the ultimate refrigerator manufacturer who is pulling together everything and assembling and selling the refrigerator? So depending on what role you're playing, you might view things differently. If you are making these devices and you have some successful patents on these devices, then those patents might be very valuable to you because you're able to exclude other competition from making the same design for crushed ice and cubed ice like you've patented. So then this patent is going to be very valuable to you. But from the refrigerator manufacturer standpoint, he is going to view your technology in comparison with other technologies and other people who make the same device. And he's going to try to decide how much of a competitive advantage he gets by, essentially deploying your patented technology in his refrigerators. So from his perspective, he may view the value of this patent a little bit differently. So a second situation, instead of a manufacturer, you might have a simple licensor, licensee type situation where basically the person who is licensing the patent is not manufacturing the devices. They have simply obtained patents and they're simply wanting to license those patents to somebody else. And that somebody else may be a manufacturer or maybe somebody else who is gathering portfolios of patents together. A typical example in this type of situation might be a university that has a particular patent or a patent portfolio. They're looking for licensing revenues, and they're not looking to make products based on their patents. Unlike the person who's making this device that is dispensing ice, the university is not in a manufacturing business. They will license the technology to somebody else. And so then they're interested in basically the terms of the license, and the value of the patent really depends on the terms of what rights associated with the patent are being transferred. And so again, there it really depends on the terms of the license. You might have a third situation where you might be a private investor. You might be providing some private capital to a company, or you might be a venture capitalist and you're investing in a startup company. And in that situation, the patents are really valuable because they drive the value of that startup, right? How much do they affect the value of the startup? That's what you're really interested in. The patents have a value because they are helping that startup company be successful and perhaps gain some strong market power for their products based on the patent. The venture capitalist and the private investor is also looking at it as collateral. So they're also interested in if the startup company is going to fail or at some point in the future, if that happens, then the only thing they may be left with are those patents. And then they may be interested in what is the ability to monetize those patents in that situation. Along the same lines, if you are a trustee in charge of an entity that is in bankruptcy, then as a trustee, your role is to maximize the size of the bankruptcy estate. And so you might take all the IP and leverage that IP as best as you can. Very often, sometimes conduct a patent auction. You conduct an auction and you then decide, to give the patents to the highest bidder. And in that context, it's really what others think your patents are worth in the context of that type of a bankruptcy or foreclosure. You might also have a situation where your patents are being infringed by somebody, and it is in the context of a litigation. The plaintiff sues the defendant for patent infringement, and in that case, if infringement is established, then patent valuation takes the form of damages, and the damages that the defendant may owe to the plaintiff might be lost profits. It might be the lost profits that the plaintiff would have perhaps received if there was no infringement. Now, the plaintiff is a manufacturer. Otherwise, the plaintiff may be entitled, if he's not able to prove lost profits, or if he's not a manufacturer, then the plaintiff may still get a reasonable royalty. So he may get a small percentage of the total infringing sales made by the defendant, but that percentage depends on how significant and how important the plaintiff's patent is to the product being sold by the defendant. So I just give you these examples to just make you understand that when we talk about valuation, you often have to talk about who are the parties involved, and patent valuation as in, is it valuable to that particular person in that context? Closely related to whom is what purpose, because the business model for extracting value from your patented innovation is also a very important measure to value a patent. So going back to my simple example, if I'm able to sell more refrigerators with my patented device, and I'm able to exclude competition from other refrigerator makers, they don't have access to this patented technology. I do. And as a result, I am able to sell more refrigerators. Then that patent is incredibly valuable to me because I can exclude competition and I can obtain market power based on this. So in that situation, the ability to exclude or eliminate or reduce competition becomes very valuable. Not in the manufacturing context, but in the licensing context, you might have you may find that your patent has certain value to somebody who's a licensee who's willing to take a bet on your patent and is willing to license your patent. And then they might see, is it helpful in their products? They might perhaps be deploying or try to deploy or test your patented technology and try to make a go of it in the market. So they may license some patent technologies and try to run with it. Very often, there is a third and important of valuation, and that is the signaling value. In other words, over and above the actual technological value, sometimes patents are deployed to indicate I am an innovative company. I make innovative products. And so you'll find things like patent pending, etc., on products. And so the patent itself has a certain sort of marketing value that goes over and above the actual technological value and the actual performance in the marketplace. It actually allows you to signal that you're an innovative company, and then it allows you to increase your revenues or increase the prices that you charge based on that reputational benefits. The other very important consideration is understanding what is your role in the value chain in a particular product. So what do I mean by value chain? If very often when you look at the end product that is sold, it is in fact based on a number of people who have contributed to that final product. So if you can think of a smartphone has a whole number of components inside it. It has all the batteries and that are supplied by various companies that make these chips for wireless communication. But it also has a whole variety of software applications on it. It has other hardware like touch screens and these display technologies. And over and above that, of course, you have all the design and the design patents and so on as well. So in fact, you look at one smartphone device and a whole variety of people have contributed to that final product, and they've made their own individual contributions that have been pulled together to make this particular product. And so it really depends on what is your role. You might be the person who may have patented and manufactured the touchscreen display, or you may have been the company that developed the particular baseband processor that does the modulation and coding of these radio frequency signals that are given out. So it really depends on what is your role in the value chain. I want to pick another example from the life sciences. So imagine that there is a bottle of sunflower oil that is being sold in the market. What people don't realize is that there's a complicated value chain there. You start with the people who are growing sunflowers, the seeds, and then the seeds are harvested. And of course, then you have a number of companies that participate not only in the collection, but in the processing and the various chemical processes that go into extracting the oil and purifying the oil and removing various ingredients and separating out the ash and the fiber and so on and so forth. And then ultimately you have final oil product that is sold. Now I can add another layer of complication and say that it might be a genetically modified sunflower. It might be a genetically modified seed so that there is more, it's designed for greater oil production, for more fat. And so it's designed to have produce more. And in that case, now you have a genetically modified seed, and there are other people who may have to understand the genetic traits in sunflower and who may have contributed to understanding the sunflower genome and so on and so forth. And so every one of these players has patents along the way. And depending on their role and what they're doing, the value of those patents, might be different. Finally, it's important to think about the economic life of the patent as opposed to the statutory life. A patent is, of course, nowadays by international convention, it can be valid for 20 years as long as the maintenance fees and annuity paid. But the economic life might be much shorter than the legal life or statutory life. What I mean by that is that usually when a patent is granted, it's early on in the technology. And at that point, there may not be very many adopters of that technology. It might still be very early, maybe even products made based on that patented technology. Maybe there is some certification and some testing that has to be done. Maybe there's some regulatory approval that has to be obtained. And so it takes a few years before the patent might actually be seen as being economically valuable. And then after a few years, that technology may become obsolete, or there may be other preemptive innovation that renders your patented technology not valuable anymore. So very often, you may have a few years there where the patent is very valuable, and then a few years towards the end when really, nobody cares for those patents. In fact, as an empirical matter, something like 70% of all patents in the US, the patent owner never pays the third maintenance fee. So the maintenance fees are paid 4, 8, and 12 years by the patent owner from the date of issuance. And very often that third maintenance fee, 12 years from the date of issuance, the patent is really not a and so the patent owner doesn't even bother to pay the third maintenance fee and simply lets it go into the public domain. So the life cycle of that patented technology and where it is in that typical S-shaped curve in the evolution of that technology is all. Finally, the other sort of big parameter when talking about patent valuation being contextual is the field of the technology. Here, it makes a big difference what the particular field is. And broadly speaking, we can sort of divide it up into two major categories. I realize this is a big oversimplification, but it's still valuable. So we can have the entire field of computers, communications, and so on one side, the IT side, and the other side is the life science, biotechnical, pharmaceutical applications. The reason why this broad schism is actually meaningful is because in most computers and communication applications, the end product embodies hundreds of thousands of patents. So most computing devices have 200, 300,000 patents in them. And they may be all the way from the semiconductor to the semiconductor processing to the integrated circuit fabrication and going on up to devices and chips and systems and so on and software and so on. And so there are studies done that show that a smartphone may have as much as 200,000 patents embodied in it. So as a result, each patent in that situation has a much smaller value compared, for example, to a patent for a pharmaceutical, for a drug. So very often with a pharmaceutical, you may have, say, 5 patents. There might be a composition patent. There may be a sort of a method for making it. There may be some patents on the coding, or on particular mechanisms to sort of maybe preserve the life of the substances, and so on. But that's it. There's, very often no more than 3 or 4 patents covering that particular formulation, that particular drug. In that situation, the value of each patent is much, much more, many orders of magnitude more than what you would find in the world of computers and communications. Further, within this world of computers and communications, depending on what aspect of the technology your patents are directed to, you may have different valuations. So, for example, in the semiconductor industry, we go through the same sort of, how does it contribute to demand? How does it contribute to the market size? And how does it drive value? And so on and so forth. The same kinds of questions that you've probably heard from other speakers as well. But in the semiconductor industry, for example, it's very common to have upfront one-time payments for patents instead of things that are like some type of a running royalty over several years. Instead, you tend to have single lump sum payments. So that kind of the norms in that particular sector that you're operating in also becomes important. Of course, your patents may be directed to some other aspects like systems, devices, or integrated circuits, and so on. Nevertheless, the same underlying principles that we have talked about, which is how much does the patented feature contribute to driving demand for the product, is very important. Software patents vary greatly, and it really depends on the particular application, and it also depends on whether the kind of software innovation is even eligible for patent protection. So in the software area, whether a patent is actually, whether the innovation is the kind that is protectable by a patent becomes an issue. You can have patents that are directed to various kinds of e-commerce and web technologies and transactions, various operating systems, numerous applications, depending on the kind of functionalities. Software as a service is becoming very important, where you're developing software that then performs an essential service that the consumer is willing to pay for. In the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, the model, the specific machine learning model that is deployed is very often the subject of patents. And those models, if they are seen as having widespread applications, then those patents on those machine learning models can be very valuable. The wireless and communications technologies present a unique opportunity to talk about something that is a big part of the patent world, and that is technology standards and patents that are part of technology standards. So you might have, whether it's 3G LTE, 4G, 5G, etc., these wireless generation of wireless communications, the patents that are essential to practicing the standard. Those patents, very often, they're very large portfolios, so each patent may not be valuable, but the portfolio is still going to be reasonably valuable. But the biggest driver is the fact that that technology is widely deployed. So you have millions and billions of phones using the patented technology. And so if your patent is a standard essential patent, meaning a patent that is essential to building a product that is compatible with the standard, because the standard is, of course, a technological specification. And it essentially, what we're saying is, in order to realize that particular technology, you need these certain patents. And if that's the case, then those patents, of course, are very valuable, primarily because they're so widely deployed. Again, in the mechanical and manufacturing context, you have a number of patents covering various kinds of mechanical devices. Virtually every kind of mechanical device that's out there is covered by patents. All of the equipment that you see in construction sites and so on, and dump trucks and compact utility loaders and all of these things, and a whole variety of smaller miniaturized mechanical components that are used in everything from surgery, etc., all the way to huge machines to really very small machines. All of these are the subject of numerous patents. Okay, my screen is frozen up here. Okay, there we go. So the other big area I want to talk about is the medical, pharmaceutical, biotech, life science space. And there you have patents covering all aspects of medical devices, medical equipment, services associated with healthcare, and there are patents covering all aspects of this. The same is true with pharmaceuticals, and the same is true with biotech, life sciences, in the context of human treatment, animal treatment, crop science, etc. So there is a number of patents on all aspects of human, animal, and plant life, so that you have analysis of genomes and analysis of treatments, and you have personalized medicine for each of these situations, and a tremendous amount of science and genetically modified trait modifications and so on. And the patents in this area, because there's a small number of patents associated with the final products that are sold, each of these patents becomes very valuable. So one now asks, what are the factors that affect patent value? And the most important is, of course, the intrinsic quality of the patent, meaning how significant is this particular invention in this patent. And very often people use proxies. People use these online tools and so on to decide if a particular patent is significant or not. Very often people employ, for example, citations. What are the number of times this patent has been cited by subsequent patents? People also ask, what are the technological areas where the citations are coming from? So if the citations are coming from a broad range of technological areas, then there is an argument to be made that this patent is applicable in a whole variety of technologies, in a whole variety of situations. And so that makes the invention more significant. So very often, the significance of the invention and how you can establish that becomes very important. A related concept is really the concept of apportionment. Apportionment by that, what we mean is, what is the incremental value of that patented invention to a final product or a technology or a service? In other words, we have to be able to tell what is the additional contribution that has been made by this particular patented technology to that product. In other words, imagine you have a patent on a particular touchscreen technology. How much is this particular patented touchscreen technology important relative to the next available touchscreen technology that could be deployed by a smartphone maker? How much better is your patented technology compared to that? And how much of the additional sales of that phone are attributable to your patented features? So that significance of the invention is, of course, a very important piece. The other piece that's very important is you have patents, but how much more R&D work needs to be done to perfect that technology? In other words, how much data do you have? How much more testing needs to be done to make it reliable, to make the performance consistent? That then informs how valuable your patent is. If you've done a lot of that development work, you've done a lot of that R&D work, then your patent becomes valuable. Third point is the level of risk associated with that technology, meaning that what is the chance that you do more testing and when you do more deployment in the field, chance the products might fail? That yes, it is, the technology is new, but maybe it's perhaps not as consistent performance, not as reliable. So there are some technological challenges. It's possible that it's a very good patented technology, but ultimately the size of the market is actually small. Why? Because the number of people who have that particular illness is maybe small, or the number of people who have that illness, most of them happen to be, poor people who simply don't have any ability to pay, in which case value, but it's difficult to extract some value from the market. Or there may be some legal risks associated with the patent, and we'll talk about the legal risks in just a minute. The second important piece related to market value is the market. What is the size of the market for the products and services that are deploying your patents? How big is the market? What is the likelihood that this product is going to be accepted in that market? And how exponential is likely to be the growth of those products and services in the market? So that what is likely to be the projected revenues in few years? Another factor that affects patent value is the amount of competition that you have in that sector, meaning how many other people are developing technologies in the same space, and what about their patented formulations? How does your technology stack up? Maybe you have a patented solar array. How does your solar array compare to other solar arrays made by other people? What is the kind of superiority that you're able to extract from your patented technology? Secondly, how easy is it to design around? Can you design around your patented technology? If you have a design around, but that design doesn't work very well, then that makes your patent strong. Because yes, you can design around the patent, but you're going to pay a price in terms of diminished performance or reduced performance. And so then in that case, somebody might actually have to use your technology, in which case that then improves the value of your patent. All right. There are a few more factors that affect patent value. As I mentioned, what are the costs that have to be incurred in order to do the additional R&D testing that we talked about? The more money that it's going to take to do all that, the less valuable your patent becomes, because the person who wants to get the patent from you is going to be having an eye towards all the additional expenses that they have to make. In addition, are there some specialized people, some specialized machines, some specialized resources needed to test and deploy your patent? That will also be taken into account. And then you have to ask yourself, after you make all those investments, what is likely to be the revenue obtained from the market? But then you have to subtract out all of the investments that you make. That what is the expected net cash flow from deploying these patents? Also, legal issues that are very important. For example, what is the scope of protection? In other words, is this a narrow patent on a narrow technology, or is this a broad patent that is basically widely applicable? So you might have a bucket with a handle and a lid and a spout. Is your patent directed to the bucket itself? In which case that's much more valuable than a patent that is directed at the spout for a bucket, right? So it depends on the scope of protection. What are the chances that the patent might be invalidated in the patent office by somebody who might want to challenge the patent? How easy is it to design around your patent claims? Are you likely to run into some enforceability issues when you try to enforce the patent? Has the patent been involved in prior litigation? And in the prior litigation, it has held up and the patent was successfully enforced, in which case it becomes even more valuable because it is a tried and tested piece of property. Now, is your patent, as we've talked about, a part of a technology standard? Is it essential to the standard or an option within the standard? So for example, you might have patents that are essential to an option, but they're not essential to the core standard itself. So, a good example might be something like Bluetooth. Bluetooth is an option. Some devices may have Bluetooth, some devices may not, but your patent, if it's directed to Bluetooth technology, then once you decide to have Bluetooth, it's essential to that Bluetooth technology. But there's going to be phones without Bluetooth, etc. Of course, nowadays, not that many anymore. Then it's really essential to the option, not essential to the core standard itself. The other piece that drives value is especially in areas where some certain testing and certification has to be done so that you have to get certain approvals. And it's particularly important in the life science of pharmaceuticals, where you may have to get certain Food and Drug Administration people to approve the drug or approve the medicine and so on. And that may take many, many years because you have to go through animal testing, human testing, clinical trials, and so on. And then those years of doing regulatory approvals then dramatically affects the value of the patent, because if the patents, that technology has been through clinical trials and it's come out successfully, then those patents become very valuable. Or until that is done, their value is diminished. There are also other issues such as what are the contractual commitments already made? So has the patent already been licensed to other people? Have certain rights already been given away? Because that then affects the value of the patent as well. Okay. There are also certain other broader sources of value that we should think about, which is that in addition to your own patent, do you have the rights to practice the technology that is embodied in the product? In other words, your patent may cover certain aspects of a product, but you may need to get other licenses from other patents in order to successfully market the product. If that's the case, then that will diminish the value of your patent because you have to actually get other patent licenses as well. On the other hand, if you already have those rights, then that improves the value of the patent. Do you have commercial data, drawings, operating experience, technological data? You can offer certain technical assistance, etc. Then that increases the value of your patent. What about improvements to the patented technology? Do you have those improvements, or are you engaged in additional improvements? So you have additional downstream patents already. That might be important. Do you have certain rights to sublicense the patent? If you do, then that's also valuable. Have you done this sort of testing in this field before? You are an established player, and so there's reason to believe that you know how to take this patented technology to market. That's a value. Similarly, of course, testing, certification, and regulatory approval, these things also drive value. So what are the big approaches to patent valuation? The big approaches, the most commonly used one is using industry standards. So you simply try to ask yourself, this patent is similar to what? This particular patent covering this type of technology is similar to other patents covering similar technologies, and what are the kinds of licenses that have already been obtained for these things? So in other words, it's just like you're trying to go buy a house and you ask yourself, how much is a similar house, the same size, in the same neighborhood, of roughly the same age? What did somebody else pay for it? The same sort of idea. Now, of course, it raises the question, these existing licenses, how comparable are they? It's very similar to the housing situation. Is it really the same size of house? Is it really a lower floor, a higher floor in a bigger building? Is it facing in the right direction? So on and so forth, right? So the same sorts of issues apply here. Are the existing licenses, to what extent are they comparable? And to the extent that they're not comparable, you may then adjust the up or down based on how comparable they are. So the use of industry standards in patent valuation is very, very important. The other very commonly used approach is discounted cash flow analysis, which simply asks you to look at the economic impact of the technology. If you deploy this product, how much investments do you have to make? And it's likely to be the sales that are going to be enjoyed by the product over a period of time, so you can project out into the future. You can also, while doing this cash flow analysis, you can identify how that is likely to change with time, and you can come up with, say, conservative estimates, realistic estimates. You can come up with sort of, very optimistic estimates, so on and so forth. And so you can see how these parameters might change. It also then allows you to model various scenarios and allows you to sort of look and try to capture what both parties see. One party may see an opportunity, the other party may see a risk. And so you try to sort of capture those things through a discounted cash flow analysis. Well, let's talk a little bit more about industry standards. Industry standards are both good and bad. The biggest advantage is that they are relatively simple. They're easy to understand. Well, if a royalty rate for this kind of technology, if that's generally what people pay, then it becomes easy. And you can sort of say, okay, you made 10 million sales, give me 50,000 for this year. So it's easy to understand. It has broad appeal. And people sort of feel like, okay, I'm basically in the ballpark. And so I'm not overpaying. It sort of supplies a answer to the question, well, what is the norm here? What is typically paid for these kinds of things? So, that's where you have really an advantage with using industry standards. The disadvantage is that most of this information is secretive, and the information that's out there is often from many years ago, so the information tends to be sort of dated. Sometimes this sort of percentages really have no connection to the actual IP rights that have been granted. So you have these numbers being thrown around, but you don't really know if this was an exclusive license or a non-exclusive license or an assignment or so on and so forth, or what was really involved, or was there a patent, but along with the patent, there was some software, there was something else. So sometimes, you miss those kinds of things. Very often, you know the percentages, but you don't know it's a percentage of what. Was it a percentage of the gross sales of what? Was it the gross sales of the final product? So the denominator information is sometimes very often not known. Sometimes these industry standards also don't capture what is the real business value of the particular opportunity. If this particular IP was deployed, what really was the business that could have been exploited? There's very often no connection to what is the actual strength of the patent itself. Was it infringed? Was it found to be valid after a challenge? So on. There's almost no data on upfront payments. Yes, it's 0.5% or 0.1% or whatever, but it was accompanied by a 250,000 upfront payment. Well, that data is very often not captured. And the industry standards also don't capture other things like you may have actually had a cross license. In other words, both parties may have given each other patents. And yet there is, no insight into what those arrangements were. So the bottom line here is industry standards are good. They're very simple, but because they're simple, they abstract away from a lot of important details that might actually be significant in a particular transaction. And so you have to keep that in mind. And with that, I will stop here and happy to answer questions, so on and so forth.
Thank you, Professor Jay Kesan, for an insightful yet an entertaining presentation on valuation of drugs and medical technology-related patents. The floor is now open for questions. I request all the participants to please either raise their hands or post the questions on Q&A chat box. Thank you, sir. We would like to reach out to you in case there are any further queries offline.
Yes, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to receive questions by email. Elsewhere, please feel free to email me. I hope this session was helpful to you. I am happy to receive any feedback on whether the session was helpful or not. It's always helpful when you do these things to hear from the audience in terms of learning what was helpful and what was not as helpful. So I appreciate your time very much. I hope you continue to have a good course. I know you're spending a part of your Sunday learning, and I hope I managed to contribute to that. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting